So we've got guests, Laura. Who are they?
Yeah, we have Miss Emily Peters, who is on staff here with our North Main Kidway and youth, not just at North Main, just youth ministry in general, and her roommate, Kaylee Wheat. And Kaylee, I heard you just got a new job, so congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah.
Emily, have you been on the podcast before?
No, this is my first time. I listened, but I've never gotten to be on.
Oh, okay. For some reason, I thought that you were on before. Maybe it was Emily Bingley with her life group.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Okay.
Emily and the senior upperclassmen girls.
Yeah, for some reason, I thought that your group, you'd send in questions on behalf of your girls a lot.
They come from the girls, yeah.
That's what I was thinking. Okay, so we're going to be talking about the sermon, Confident Conquerors, from this past week. Facebook stuff, if you've got it on there, hopefully you can see it. The comment that Laura just made. We need to pose for the thumbnail. This is the most important part. Goofy faces. 3, 2, 1, go.
Yes.
It's like they were ready for that.
Were you guys ready for that?
We
Yeah. I was like, that's the worst part. It goes in the email, so everybody's going to see it.
I actually was not expecting that, but that was great.
That was very good.
All right. Very good. Before we jump in, Laura, announcements.
Yeah, so we've got this thing called Vacation Bible School coming up next week. So if you have not signed up to volunteer, please do that. It's a fun time, crazy week, but lots of fun. Great way to get to know people, connect with people. That's Monday through Thursday. And then on Friday, we have our annual volunteer extravaganza. And this is a way just to say thank you to anybody who volunteers at the church in whatever ministry you volunteer. The extravaganza is just a fun time for families to get together. There's usually bounce houses, there's food, all sorts of stuff. I do think there's an RSVP for that. If you need to RSVP, I'm going to say call the church office because I don't have a link right handy here on how to have people RSVP. So call the church office, we can get you RSVP'd.
Maybe as they're asking me a question, you could search for that. Also, Laura, did you say the time on Friday?
I did not.
I'm asking for a friend, not for me, totally for somebody else. Do you know the time?
I do not. I want to say 6:00, but I do not. Emily Peters, do you know?
I feel like it's 6:00 too, but it might be 6:30.
I'll do some research on that.
Okay, very good. Emily, I must say, impressed that you're thinking and awake because you just got back from where?
From Budapest, Hungary.
Yep, you were on for those who don't know, what were you doing?
I was visiting some of our global partners there. We've been doing like a discipleship class, studying movements of discipleship in specifically urban settings. And so we've done that for about 2 months. And then this trip was kind of like the culmination of let's go put our skills into action, especially in a cross-cultural context where there are language barriers. And Budapest is very diverse, I learned. And so I met a lot of different people from a lot of different places. So it's cool to talk about how you can get to know someone at a casual level, but then transition to a more meaningful conversation, which ultimately leads to hopefully a spiritual conversation, which then can give you an opportunity to share the gospel and start to study the Bible, which is really cool.
And the we that you were part of was a group from our denomination, just different younger folks who have an interest in missions, and you were part of a cohort for a year, and then your group, because of the pandemic, didn't get to do the missions trip. And so you guys, I don't know if everybody from your group got to tag along this year.
Yeah. Actually, so everyone in my group went to Jordan a year ago, maybe.
Okay.
But just with some traveling restrictions and things, I just decided to stay put. And so I prayed boots on the ground here. And then this was kind of we want to get you to go at some point. And I established my relationship with these partners through the cohort. And so this was a really great fit.
Well, very, very, very good. All right, let's jump into questions that you have for me from the sermon. And then I've got questions for you.
Cool. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So this actually is not from this past sermon, but one a few weeks ago.
Okay.
But I've been saving it. So you mentioned a couple weeks ago you had a life mission statement. And I just want to know, like, what did the process of writing that look like, and how would you recommend, like, we write one, basically?
Yeah, we discussed this a little bit. I don't know how much I got into my whole process. I was just, and it's hard to remember exactly the season of life because this would have been over 10 years ago that I did all of this. But it was, I was really wrestling with, as a pastor, there's so much that I could be focused on. What am I to be focused on? And at that time, just really looking into our denominational history, going back even beyond when the EPC existed, to one of our founding confessional documents, the Westminster Confession. It's Shorter Catechism. The first question is, what's the chief end of man? To glorify God and to enjoy him forever. And so like I had that statement, which is like the classic question, like, what is our purpose? And that's what the Westminster Divines, the folks who put it together, said: glorify God. And how do we do that? John Piper famously changed the "and" to "by," glorify God by enjoying him forever. And then as a pastor, I look at what Jesus gave to the church as the Great Commission, to make disciples. And so then I think that it all clicked pretty quickly. I had this catechism question and the command to make disciples. And so then I put glorify God by making disciples who find their joy in Jesus. And so that was how I did it. Just looking at who I was. I would say everybody should wrestle with, God, what have you specifically put me here for? Because there's so much to the Christian life, but based on gifts that he's given you through his Spirit, some people, though we all are to be encouragers, some people are gifted particularly for that. And so you kind of feel like the hand of God on you, of you are an encourager to people. And so whatever that is, to remind yourself, because there will be days where even the most encouraging person will be discouraged, and forget that, hey, you're here to encourage no matter what's going on in your life. Or it may be to particular way of ministering to people. It may even be a particular calling to a kind of people, maybe to the elderly or to the young, or whatever it might be. And once you have wrestled with God and allow others to confirm it in your life, by saying, yeah, we see this gifting in you, or this calling upon you. I wrote it down so that I remember it, because I feel that my biggest detriment to doing what God's called me to do is that I forget what he's called me to do because I get caught up in other things. And so I read it to remember, and then that just helps to focus on my day, what I'm doing. It really gives me great confidence in being in ministry when it's both going really, really great and not so great. Like, hey, don't forget, this is why you're here. And I think that in many ways, years later, Laura and I are in a conversation with the elders about, like, who is Josh? And probably before anybody in that room really knew my mission statement, that center part, making disciples, is like one of the key things that the elders and Laura have said, hey, that's like a big value bucket that you have, is making disciples. And I think that that's probably out of having that mission statement. But roommates are great at helping. Like, they can see it in your life. Families, friends, trusted individuals, life group members, they can help you find it.
Cool. Thanks.
I think you're the second one too.
So this one also has a little bit of a lead up. So while I know it's not true because we've eaten chili together and stuff, I feel like I see you like Josh Hansen, head pastor, like put you on this little pedestal, whatever. But I just was curious, like, you talked about persecution a lot. What kinds of persecution do you face as a pastor? And then how do you confidently conquer that persecution?
I don't know that I would say that I face persecution. I don't want to water down what our brothers and sisters in places that are being arrested, and by using that same term. I would say that the areas that are automatically create friction with by what I do is if I'm around people who don't know what I do, as soon as, like, if they start, so what do you do? If I say I'm a pastor, it is more than throwing a wet blanket on the situation. Like, it is like, I've been in situations at different kind of dinner events and going around the room, and it's like perfectly normal. Oh, you do this, you do this, you do this. I'm the pastor at Gateway Church, and all the air is sucked out of the conversation. And so you just kind of get used to that. And honestly, I tried to go last when they ask that question so that they see my response to them, so that hopefully it won't come across as any reason for them to think, oh, he was being judgmental or whatever as the pastor. So I get used to that. Laura, what would you say I mean, maybe you would know.
One thing that popped in my head was your experience. You were just talking about this last week, your experience when you were in maybe Bangladesh.
Oh, Sri Lanka.
Or Sri Lanka. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if that was because of me being
really persecution, but
me being a pastor, but on that trip that I was on there, that missions trip, there was definitely aggression towards me. I think it was mainly due to me being a foreigner and it being recognizable, probably being recognized as Westerner or American. If I had not been in the military, it would have probably been the most unsafe feeling that I would have felt. But military kind of skews that of what feels unsafe. But yeah, I think that was maybe they associated my skin color with being Western, with that being Christian or something. But there was definitely an aggression there just towards me, which wasn't towards others who, though American and Western don't look like me, they blended in better. And so they didn't experience that. There's part of me that is my natural disposition. And I often will say that I wish it was like a spiritual maturity in me, but it's just my natural disposition that the Lord has blessed me with not thinking too much about when I say something in a sermon, it's going out digitally for all the world to use against me, to do a little clip of it. And so I don't worry about that, where that is a real thing that I see happening, which is kind of nasty, where people will take little clips of what pastors say out of context to make them look either judgmental or to make them look silly or obnoxious or whatever. And I would just be afraid to say anything if I was worried about that. I can't really think of, we really have it pretty good right now here in the US, where I don't think about it. I'm not so worried about that compared to, again, fellow pastors around the world. It's a blessing. What about you, Emily? Any questions?
Yeah, I got the next one. I don't know if we put it in our order, but mine is specifically addressed to the way that the text words, talking about levels of spiritual maturity. I can't find it.
The children and the
Kayla's got it on her text this morning.
Talk about groceries first.
Okay, so could you just give a little bit of the context as to why John refers to, he talks about children, but then he talks about young men and fathers, but never addresses like young men and women and mothers as well. Is that a cultural reasoning, or do you have any ideas about that? Does it make sense?
Yeah, that would just been cultural. It's not like sexism or anything. That would have been just it. Because often, like even in the last part in Revelation, which was written by the same author, you are sons, and so now in contemporary language, though the Greek word there meant sons, we would realize that he's including men and women in that. That's just how they spoke in that day. I would equate it to that in our day and age. It is not uncommon for language to be like, even in this kind of setting, at the end of it, for us to say, hey, it was fun hanging out with you guys.
Yeah.
And it's just a way that we use language, that's our equivalent of it today.
Yeah, I've been like dinged for that when I'm teaching. Like I'll be like, you guys, and they'll be like, well, I'm a girl, so I don't have to. I'm like, oh my goodness, just do it. But so yeah, that makes sense. That makes
a lot of sense. Good sense. The second question I had was about the verse. I had to read your manuscript because I couldn't listen to it in the airport because we were flying, and then it's not uploaded in the podcast form yet, and I couldn't get the live stream from YouTube. It was a whole thing. So in your manuscript, it talks about on page 8, the verse from Colossians 2, verse 15. It says, He, God, disarmed the rulers and authorities and put them to open shame by triumphing over them in Him, Jesus. And then you went on to say, Paul tells us that God has disarmed all of our spiritual enemies by triumphing over them through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. So if God has disarmed our spiritual enemies, then why then do we still experience spiritual warfare?
It is the illustration, and at some point it'll probably be too old, but it's still part of our American history. It's the difference between D-Day and V-Day in World War II. That really on D-Day, the victory was won, but it was not the same time. It was later on that victory was actually finalized and accomplished, but the enemy was destroyed, the enemy was defeated on D-Day, that's where it was accomplished. And so on the cross, our victory is guaranteed. It was secured. Once Christ returns, the end of all of the enemy being captured up and no longer taking last minute shots at us, even though they're defeated, will be done. And so, it's kind of like in the book of Revelation, it talks about Satan being trapped for 1,000 years, or unable to influence the world for 1,000 years. And one of the debates in that theology is that the black and white thinking of either seeing Satan having no influence on the world during whatever you consider that 1,000 years, or what would the opposite mean? It would mean that Satan has unrestrained influence over the world. Mm-hmm. And it's like that's neither where we are. That Satan has influence on the world right now, but it is not restrained. He is on a leash. Mm-hmm. And then until that day comes when we see him thrown into the lake of fire for all eternity, that's when it will be no more. And so the victory was secured on the cross, but the final V-Day celebration, victory is done, is when Christ returns. And so we're in the in-between time of all of that being fulfilled. But yet it is, what I appreciate about John is speaking in it in present terms, because it is guaranteed. It's not we hope it's going to happen. Mm-hmm. Our enemy is defeated. God is outside of time. And so for him, it is done. It is finished. For us, it is finished. And yet we live in the promise of that while not seeing the full culmination of it. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I would say. But I feel like for most Christians, what I don't want us to ignore is that we have overcome. That that in the midst of that trial that you may go through, suffering, health issues, relationship issues, that we can easily feel so defeated that we're just stuck. And I just feel like, man, I need to stress more of there is nothing that can come against us that has to make us stuck. Mm-hmm. That there's something we're not believing in the gospel or trusting in Christ in that moment when we're stuck. And if we believe more, remember better the promises, there is nothing in this world that will make us stuck, make us ineffective. That's the power that has been promised to us, that lives in us. And, the end of in Paul's letters to Timothy, he also talks about in the end times that there is a religion that becomes popular but lacks the power. And I just want to make sure that that's not the Christianity that I'm proclaiming, that it's power. There's power in it.
That's good. Man, chills.
Chill. Good
Not just
stuff.
because my hands are clammy. All right. Here we go. This is the long one.
Hold a second. For everybody who knows this, hold a sec, Kaylee. I got to pause for a second and tell a little story. There was a Young Life chili cook-off dinner. Correct?
Yeah.
And at this dinner, my wife was sitting at the table, and Emily happened to be sitting next to us. And you were sitting there, right, Kaylee?
Yeah.
And then you left.
Yeah.
I can't remember because you said you were sitting with the bigwigs or something.
Bigwigs, yeah.
Felt uncomfortable. And then wherever you went, I don't know who asked the question, but somebody asked if Emily Peters was my daughter.
Right.
And I believe you were part of that question, right?
Yeah. So it was a guy who joined our life group, and he said something about, like, I can't remember the exact question, but it was like, well, isn't Emily sitting with her dad? And we were like, no, that's Josh. He's like the pastor you've been watching for weeks. And he was like, yeah, but that's like her dad. And I was like, no.
Okay. So this is good. I'm glad that I asked this so you were trying to clarify the situation. I wasn't sure if you were just trying to go along with it because you thought it was funny. That's good.
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And I think we did the math. And Emily, was I old enough to be your dad or not?
Josh, you tell me every time that we talk about how old I am, you always say, wow, I'm old enough to be your dad.
Okay.
So,
I am old.
Yeah,
enough.
you're old enough to be my dad. Don't
when
forget
he
that.
said the V-E-V-D,
V-D.
I was like racking in my brain. I was like, okay, I've heard this. What was happening on those days?
Oh, boy.
Very good. Sorry, I sidetracked you. Go ahead, Kaylee.
No. That's okay. So it's a long one. You mentioned that as a parent, it's your job to lead your child into adulthood. So I grew up in the church, and I would say that, like, I started at the 50-yard line, like you'd mentioned. But then leaving home, like, especially for school, was hard. I felt like I was alone and struggled through, like, a few bumpy years. But since then, I've had people in my life who I would say, like, have pushed me off the 50-yard line, and nowhere near a touchdown, but like maybe like 52 to 55. I don't know. But my questions are, what does the child to adult process look like for the child and the parent? How can we encourage people who have heard truth but are riding on their parents' coattails? And what are next steps for someone who wants to grow?
A great question. And so I'll just keep this spiritual. So parents, and we talk about this a lot, Gateway partners with parents, that parents have the primary responsibility to train up their children in the instruction of the Lord, to disciple them, that if any parent or grandparent or guardian is banking on an hour on Sunday for their kid to be all the discipleship that their child needs when they have another 150 plus hours out there being discipled by the world, that is not going to cut it. And so we've talked a lot about on this podcast of different things that I've done with my kids growing up, Bible reading plans, books that we've read together, catechisms to train them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. That changes with seasons of life, kids that are little versus kids that are teenagers. It will change, but that you need to prepare them for that as parents. And then at some point, the children have to start owning their faith. That just like I mentioned with the Christian that's an infant, that they won't read their Bible unless someone tells them to. They won't serve unless someone tells them to. That is obviously what happens with children as they grow up. That but at some point, and so if there's any high school students listening to this, you need to start asking yourself, is this faith my own? And in my faith story, that's when I came to faith was realizing that I was just doing this because my parents did it, not because I actually believed it. And that was the moment where my eyes were opened of, I need to believe myself and not just do that. Now, once you're on your own and no longer come to church because your parents are bringing you to church, and so there's the decision that you're making. Like, most kids don't have a decision. Mom and dad say you're going to church, you're going to church. But now the decision is yours. How to grow. The way that we help folks grow here at Gateway, our discipleship process: worship, connect, serve, and go. And so it begins by worshiping regularly. In person is always best. We realize that there are reasons why some people may have to be at home or away from the in-person gathering, but gathering together and not just being in our building, but actually being in the worship service, worshiping and singing with God's people, not showing up once the announcements are happening. Like there's unity in singing the songs with the people of God, that we're claiming these truths together. We're agreeing in prayers together. And so, making sure that you arrive early enough, making sure that you don't get caught out in the lobby. I love people talking, but there's a point where, like, hey, if every week you're out in the lobby talking and not making it into the worship service, there's something off there. Like, come earlier to talk in the lobby, stay later after you've been in there. But it starts with worship, and then, connecting, being in a life group, discussing the sermon, discussing a good Christian book, discussing the Bible together, sort of aside to life groups, not in place of, but in addition to. Equip classes are great places to maybe go deeper in a Bible study or a topic. And then serving, finding some place to regularly serve in the church. And regularly, I would say, if at minimum it needs to be in the monthly category, for you to really be trying to give of yourself selflessly for the sake of others in the church. And then going. It could be going and serving in the college ministry. It could be going nationally or somewhere here locally, serving in Women's Resource Center or something like that, or going internationally, like Emily just got back. But that's where you start to see what is happening all around the world, where you just don't hear stories that are written by guys like Nick Ripken, but you get to go and see the stories and come back with your own. And then another part of it is giving, generous giving. That's something that we value here at Gateway, of being generous with our resources, and not just time and talent are kind of the easy ones to give. There's a reason why Jesus talked a lot about money. It is a lowercase g God that demands your full worship in our culture. And so to know that you are not bowing down to it is to be generous with it, and to give to God's work at Gateway, to give to God's work all around the world. But if you're doing those things, and in olden times, the way that pastors would talk about that, those are the ordinary means of grace. That's the ordinary way that God grows people and matures them in the faith. What's the ordinary means of living a healthy life? Of being a healthy life, eating healthy foods, doing a little bit of exercise. It's really, really boring and monotonous, but if you do that for a long period of time, you'll be healthy, barring some sort of like extenuating circumstance. We want the, how can I eat all of the really unhealthy food, not exercise at all, and still be healthy kind of thing? Like, is there a pill for that? And we want that spiritually, but it's the ordinary means of grace, the gathering with God's people, the ordinary disciplines or practices, reading your Bible, praying regularly, journaling if you, when you read the Bible and God speaks to you, meditating on the scripture, memorizing it, very ordinary things that God's Spirit has chosen to use as the means to grow his people. And so an ordinary doesn't have to mean boring. Ordinary means this is what God has chosen to do. And so join him, as opposed to saying, God, would you join me in some sort of exciting way that I want to grow? But I find it to be really good. And this book, Enjoying God, by Tim Chester talks a lot about just the ordinary means of grace. And
Can you hold it back up?
I want to take a picture of it. Got it.
Very good. And so what's interesting about it, the chapter on reading God's word, it is he just really is like, do you not realize that this is the God who eternally exists and has created all things speaking to you in his word? It is not just you reading for information. This is you getting to say, speak, Lord, I'm hearing you.
Mhm.
Like I'm reading from you. And just the way that he writes is so encouraging to, in every word of scripture, we can enjoy the Spirit's voice, like approaching every page of God's word with the excitement that I'm going to get to hear from God. And so it just makes it a very, between relationships with one another, worship and all that stuff, he just goes through these ordinary means of grace. Very encouraging. I don't even remember what you asked, but there's my answer.
I have like a follow-up question to that. So you talked about how at Gateway we want to partner with parents to help their kids grow and become disciples. What would you say, so for people that don't have children in the church, like they're not raising families at home right now, how can they also help lead kids towards following Jesus forever? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so that would be where I would say that comes through volunteering in the church. Mm-hmm. And so I just wrote a thank you card to someone who I believe is younger, no kids, that's serving second graders here at County Road 9 during the summer. And I know that right now Bowling Green students are many of them are gone, but there are quite a few of them that serve in Kidway here at County Road 9 during the school year, investing in the next generation. Anytime, whether you're the teacher, the helper, the youth volunteer doing life group or doing up in the attic, from any of those next gen ministries, when you serve there, you are helping us be a church that raises up the next generation of Christians. And so you may not have the kids at home. VBS is a great way to do it. Those are all the kinds of ways to help raise up and disciple a kid. Into college ministry, the mentoring program that we do with UF, that's a great way for someone to say, hey, I'm going to invest in the next generation as well. Laura, I don't know, you've overseen children's ministry, you've done mentoring, maybe you've got ideas.
Yeah, one different thing than what you haven't already said, I'm not great at this, but I'd like to be better at it, is within my life group, there are a lot of, now this doesn't necessarily work if you're in a life group that's all people just like you, but I am not in a life group with all people just like me. And so there are a lot of younger kids represented in our life group, the kids of the people in my group. So just getting to know them, like don't ignore them when they're around, talk to them, know what's important to them, maybe even go to some of their sporting events or their music events or, something like that, just sort of investing in those kids that are right there. You're already friends with their parents. So just investing in them, I think, is good.
Kids want to know, names are important for everyone, but for kids, their name being known is really, really important. And so that's something that any of us can do. You want to make sure that you know their parents so that you're not seeming like you're a little creepy, but like knowing kids' names, bending down to be closer to their level when you say, hey there, it's so good to see you here this week. If you're greeting, a greeter at one of our doors, don't just greet the parents. Make sure that if you can, get to know the kids' names and welcome them. I think over here at County Road 9, Randy McDonald is the candy man over here. His bag full of, I hope that he has stock in suckers and candies because he's given so much away. But all the kids know Mr. Randy, and so that's a way for him to build a relationship with hundreds of kids over here, just through being that individual who is the guy that all the parents are eager for their kids to go up and say hi to because he's just built a relationship with them.
Thank you. Cool.
You girls have any other questions?
Not this
right now, but
time.
Maybe at 9 o'clock we'll send in a bunch of
what's our record? 13 questions at a time.
So here are my questions for you all. Here's my icebreaker that I think, Emily, I'm interested in knowing how difficult it will be to have one thing, or it's possible that there is one thing that you feel so strongly about that it will just come right out. All right. So what's something that people do in traffic that really bothers you?
I'm curious about everything.
I like it when it's just me on the road.
Just being on the road bothers you, Kaylee.
No, if it's just me, no.
But other
I feel like
people
other
being
people
on the road.
being on the road makes me mad. I got them about that.
I'm curious because Laura said she thinks that our answer is going to be very similar, but I think
I've got a few. I don't know. The biggest one for me is when I'm in the left lane on the highway and there's like, I'm leaving enough space in case something happens that I can stop and slow down. And then someone just comes on in, like I'm making space for them. That drives me. And then I'm like, oh, I'll be patient.
I get really annoyed when people don't use their turn signals. That bothers me. Like, especially when we're like on a road and there are multiple places to turn. And so I don't know if they're turning and I'm trying to make a move too. Like that stresses me out. Or like on the highway when people just weave in and out and they don't signal when they're merging. So are you a dangerous driver that's just crossing the line or are you intentionally crossing the line? That bothers me.
What about you, Laura?
Yes to those. Emily, all I was saying was I figured we would both have quite a list.
Oh yeah.
Because we both tend to be able to see the things that are wrong in other people pretty well. That's all I was saying. So one that I experienced this morning is when people, if I'm really honest, when people go the speed limit, that kind of annoys me, but especially when they go below the speed limit, that really annoys me. So I experienced that while I was late to the dentist today. Yeah.
I think mine is mainly just seeing somebody on their phone, like texting or something, because I just think, oh, come on, we're nowhere near as good at multitasking as we think that we are. Yeah. Now, I will say that the one thing that never bothers me, that I actually enjoy seeing other drivers, if you are rocking out to a tune and like you were just singing, like, oh man, that makes my day. I love it.
Especially at like stoplight, so they're really, it's great.
It's even better when their windows are up and you can't hear the music and they're just going like that. That's fun. Yeah. In the sermon, I mentioned, and it was already mentioned here a little bit by Kaylee, the comparison trap, the football field illustration. When's a time that you found yourself caught in sort of that spiritual comparison trap?
That's a great question. I feel like all the time. It was really nice. I loved that analogy. Emily and I are actually going to Cuba, and so I had started planning my talk, and I was kind of talking about that comparison trap. But we're just talking to women, and so I thought it was really, really nice to hear like that men struggle with that too, because I kind of thought that was like a girl thing of like, I don't know why I thought that, but I don't know, like even just Emily coming back from Hungary was kind of hard because I was like, oh, I didn't go to Hungary, or I didn't go on mission, like I don't know. So I think and Emily working at the church, I feel like is another thing that I struggle with sometimes, because I'm like, oh, that's really cool that you got to have that conversation at lunch. Meanwhile, I was getting yelled at by an 11-year-old. So
you're into yeah. I feel like comparison, like when I was reading through that this morning, like comparison is like an ongoing struggle for me in multiple aspects. Or even being on staff at the church, it's, oh, I'm one of the younger ones. And so looking at other experiences that people have that I'm not there yet, that is like an ongoing struggle. Or even like when I am going on mission, like there's always someone that I'm on the team and I'm like, I just do not speak that eloquently or behave that maturely all the time. Like some people just always have it together and I do not. And so especially like when we're serving or teaching, I rarely get in my head about that. And like, so thinking about going to Cuba, okay, I need to stand up and talk in front of this church of 40 to 50 women that I've never met and I don't know what they're going through, then I'll listen to someone else talk, and they do that really well, but I don't always. So that's a hard spot.
Laura, do you want to share anything, or you want me to go on to my next one?
I mean, I don't mind, but for time's sake, you can go on. I'll pipe in on one of the other ones.
I, in the sermon, mentioned that God forgives us, why he forgives us for his name's sake, as opposed to all the other many reasons. And that was not all the verses, but I backed it up with quite a few verses right in a row of trying to highlight that that's not a one-off theme, that is that's found throughout Scripture. So knowing that God forgives us for his namesake, how has that truth changed the way you live, changed your priorities? Maybe it's changing your priorities. Maybe that was a new idea. I don't know. How did that truth from the sermon, how is it impacting you?
I think for me, it's just the reminder that my actions really matter. So whether I'm Emily that's on church staff or just Emily in the coffee shop, that's something like I felt like I learned a lot in Budapest too, is the reminder of, regardless if I'm walking in with a shirt that says I'm a Christian on it or whatever, my actions matter to God, whether he sees it or not. And so whether I'm just being kind and asking, how are you doing today in the coffee shop? Those are all actions that will reflect God. At least I hope. And so the way I carry myself and strike up conversations with strangers or respond to the lady that cuts me off in traffic, like all of those things matter and God sees that. And so that's kind of where I land, is everything I do should center around, am I living for Christ or not? That makes sense?
Yep.
Okay.
Can I say ditto?
Yeah, that works.
I feel like at school especially, like, it's hard because I can't be like, Jesus loves you, and then like there'll be backlash for that depending on where you're at. I don't know. And we almost made the whole podcast without mentioning her, but Sarah Sickmiller will say like, you're not powerful enough to wreck God's plan. And so like I can plant seeds and be joyful and try to love them well without them, blatantly making that connection of like, Miss Wheat goes to church, and so that's why she's, I don't know. Like, so I think it's nice to be reminded of like, it's God's mighty power that is going to save people. And so I can go and like rest assured that I've been forgiven for God, not for me to be perfect.
So was there some sort of like bet how long you could go without saying Sarah Sickmiller's name?
No, but I did tell Levi I would shout him out. So
oh, then now's as good a time as any. 4230 is where you said it. Now, for people who don't know, Sarah and Jeremy's one of our elders, but long before he was even an elder, they've had a sort of a pocket of folks from Gateway who they've taken into their home and shepherded for a long time, and so that's where that relationship comes from, and they've just done a good job of loving on people, loving on you too. I ended the sermon by reading a bunch of promises to us directly from Jesus from the book of Revelation. How did those or do those, or how does your confidence increase because of those promises? Laura, they're looking. You want to go first?
Yeah, I'll go first. I re-looked it up and I just jotted down a few that really were the most impactful for me. But the promise of a new name, I love that one. We've sort of joked about this a little bit. Josh, you and I have. I don't think I've ever mentioned on the podcast, but I will say, like, sweet used to be a word that people would use to describe me. I don't get described that way a lot anymore. The nature of my job, maybe sometimes people see a different side of me, I guess. I don't know. Other words are sometimes used. And it's hard to not carry those as my identity then and say, oh, I am a whatever words are. And so just that promise of like a new name. I don't have to be what other people label me as, but God has a new name for me. That my name will never be blotted out. Once we are God's, we're God's forever, and nothing will blot that out. And then, I mean, I think a lot of people cling to the promise of no more tears, no mourning, no crying, no pain. I love that. So it gives me great hope for the future.
Ladies?
I can go.
Cool.
I've actually never studied Revelation. I opened it one time, read some of it, and then like cried myself to sleep and like was panicked about it. So I like am looking forward to sitting at some point in the future, but I haven't yet. But I love the promise that Jesus is going to come back, and like we've already said, he's already won, but like he's going to come back in clean sweep win, like it's going to be done. And so it's hard for me to wrestle with the fact that like I'm a sinner, and that is just that, like I sin even without trying, like even without knowing. And so it's hard, but it is nice to rest in the fact that like I know Jesus has already won, and that one day when I have to stand before God, Jesus is going to be standing on my side and backing me up. So those like promises of like what that's going to look like, and knowing that he's going to be victorious, are really, I think, like kind of life-giving.
Yeah. Laura, I like that you mentioned it already, but that Revelation 21:4-7, so talking about how there will come a day where there will be no more tears, no more sadness, no more pain. I just really like that reminder that the pain that we experience here is temporary, whether that's from circumstances that we put ourselves in or ones that are given to us without choice. It won't be like that forever. And so that's a really comforting thing of we'll be welcomed into the family of God forever, and that is where we will stay, and there'll be no more sadness. So that's mine.
Well, ladies, thank you so much for joining us. Great questions, great conversation. For anybody listening, make sure you send in questions that you have about the sermons, about anything regarding the Christian faith. We do sermon discussions. We do Q&A discussions as well. You can send them in via our website or app. And next week's episode is finally, we've been building up the anticipation, the very special kids questions episode. With
there's still time to put questions into that.
You can send them in. We can see. This is where it's more elementary age because of VBS coming up. And there is quite possibly the best question ever asked for Pastor Josh in this list of questions. And
I think I know what it is.
I feel like Louie's offended because she's sent in a lot of questions.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe.
Best in the realm of hilarious. Gonna make mom and dad proud kind of question. But it was funny. It's cute. Anyway, thank you ladies for being here.
Thanks for having us.